Hello, I'm Myra Jacobs, Executive Director and founder of the National Bone Marrow Transplant Link. We provide information and support regarding bone marrow stem cell transplants. Our focus is to assist transplant patients and their families through education and support. The National Bone Marrow Transplant Link is pleased to present the following film, The New Normal. The families you will meet have already taken the journey you're about to begin. They have successfully completed the transplant process and are living new normal lives. Although no film can fully prepare you for what lies ahead, we hope the new normal will help reduce your fears by providing greater understanding and encouragement.
I had my transplant October 27th, 1998.
I had my stem cell transplant on September 2nd, 1998.
I had my bone marrow transplant on January 31st, 1996.
I had my transplant on September 7th, 1995.
I had my transplant on February 7th, 1992.
I had my transplant on November 18th, 1991. I was wearing shorts at the time, Bermuda shorts, and I looked down at my leg, and there was a huge black and blue mark on my leg. And that just sent a signal to me. I couldn't account for how that had gotten there.
I had absolutely no symptoms of being sick or having any disease or any medical problem. I had had my annual physical, which is a requirement at General Motors for all of our executives. And he picked up a slightly lowered white count when he did the blood workup.
What happened was I started to experience some double vision, and I decided to have my eyes checked, and then it just kind of went from there that she didn't really want to make the diagnosis without having me see an oncologist, so then we went to the oncologist and he did the bone marrow aspiration.
When you're told you have a diagnosis of leukemia, you don't really hear any subsequent words about cure rates or treatment or anything. You just immediately go from here to not being here.
I did what any tough-minded, strong-willed executive might do. I fainted. I fell dead to the floor.
I did not know what an oncologist was. I had never been associated with cancer. I was devastated. I got home, and Mike was there with Amber. He knew. When I opened the car door, he said, opened the door, he says, "Well, how'd it go?" I mean, he could tell I'd been crying, and I dropped in the yard in his arms.
I think people going through this kind of catastrophic situation, perhaps they tend to think, as I did, that my situation is unique. I'm not so sure that that's true. I think there are more things in common than not in common. And so I think there's much to be gained from knowing what to expect.
When you receive that kind of diagnosis, your world is turned upside down just instantly. The first emotional reaction is, at least for me, was overwhelming fear.
And I just remember feeling as though the top of my head was going to explode. I could actually feel heat at the top of my head, like the top would just blow away.
It's kind of funny. I was stretching to go for a run. That'll teach me. And I felt this big lump. I finally went and got it checked. I mean, you go from one life of no doctors, no clinics, no nothing, and then you're thrown into this really almost physically parallel world of just doctors and clinics and appointments, and that's where I went from one 30-second phone call to another.
I really felt that I would survive that procedure. However, I also knew that I could reduce my anxiety by making preparations for various scenarios that might occur.
But then I really quickly moved into a survival mode. I found out, that the bone marrow transplant did exist, so I immediately kind of took the bull by the horns as much as I could, as much as just a human being could, and said, I'm not going to let this thing get past me.
My military background was extremely helpful, as it turned out, in approaching the challenge that I faced. It's akin to a war when you are diagnosed with this kind of a disease. You've got to bring to bear all of the resources possible. You've got to understand all the risks.
My daughter was my inspiration. She was the reason that I did my transplant, because I didn't want her to grow up without a mommy, and only being 3, she would have never remembered me. She just gave me the will to keep fighting no matter what happened.
The things I worried about, the things that I feared more about were what if the worst were to happen? What then would happen to my family?
We never had a doubt as to what our course of treatment would be. The children were all small then, and we said, definitely, we're going with the bone marrow transplant.
I've been in bone marrow transplantation since the 1960s. We did our first transplants in humans in 1968. Since 1968, tremendous advances have been made in the area of bone marrow transplantation. It has become a much, much safer procedure and a much more successful procedure.
You need to have healthy bone marrow because in order to produce red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets, which are essential for life, those cells are made there. It's the home. The bone marrow is the home for these cells.
A bone marrow transplant in many diseases offers the only hope of cure for that disease.
Stem cell transplantation is used for a number of diseases. The majority of those diseases are cancer or malignant diseases of some sort. Other diseases, though, are not cancerous diseases.
We now have ways of doing transplants using much less toxic preparation for the transplant so that people can do this almost as an outpatient now. And because of that, we can do transplants in much older people.
There are essentially 2 types of transplant. Autologous transplant using your own stem cells, allogeneic transplant using a donor's stem cells. The recommendation for the type of transplant that you receive will come from your oncologist or transplant physician. A bone marrow transplant is the process of taking stem cells, which are actually made in your bone marrow. You take them out of your body or a donor's body, and they're reinfused back to the patient after chemotherapy and radiation.
The first thing was fear, but then I think you go into denial, or you think, well, I'm sure there's a mistake. And, but then we thought we better go get another opinion at least.
And I couldn't believe there was only a single treatment, and I wanted to go and get at least a second or third opinion, which I started to do immediately within a day or 2.
I chose to have a bone marrow transplant, although I knew it was a risky procedure. I think it's quite difficult for African Americans and maybe minorities in general to find matches in the general population. So I was very fortunate to have a match.
The transplant team at the hospital that you're going to be seeking your care is going to be so important in your treatment and recovery that you must trust them. You must know in your heart and in your mind that you are in the best place for you for this transplant. The medical team consists of a multidisciplinary team, meaning that there, as well as the physicians and nurses, there are social workers, pharmacists, psychologists, everyone that you need to get you through that transplant. I don't think that it's important to have your transplant done in the place that does the most transplants. But I do believe that it's important for you to have your transplant done at a place that has significant experience. If you're lucky enough to live near a center that has that kind of experience, then your decision is simple. If you're not, you need to look into where you can find that kind of care, and that care may be away from your home.
I had the utmost faith in my medical team right from the beginning. The first thing that impressed me with them was that they never tried to gloss over anything. They told us right up front what the possibilities were, and that this was no joking matter, that it was very serious.
So just knowing that there was hope, that there was somebody that could help me, and that was just, I mean, it was like day and night difference.
I went to a therapist. I talked about my concerns. I had no reservations at all about seeking professional help for this. I knew I needed support, and I needed a lot of it.
It's very important for people that are about to go through a bone marrow transplant to talk to somebody. I didn't do it. In some ways, I wish that I had. But everybody deals with it in a different way. And I found that some people will respond in sometimes they're afraid, sometimes they're just angry, and that consumes everything.
If you did not come to us with some fear and some concerns, we would actually worry about you. So this is perfectly normal.
One of the situations that I recall feeling was that I was somehow to blame, that somehow the onset of this disease was my fault.
I didn't blame anyone. I didn't blame anything. But I looked at the sense of responsibility I had toward maybe getting sick.
I think that was a benefit of going through some therapy, is realizing I didn't do anything to make this happen.
I wasn't angry about the disease, but the financial loss, having to quit work before you actually knew where your income was coming from.
Financial concerns are absolutely important in transplant if you're facing a transplant. The nurses that you will see, your transplant coordinator, will initiate discussion about those concerns for you. The social worker and the financial representative within your treatment center will also help you figure out what you need to do with some of these concerns.
We thought maybe we'd have to sell our house and maybe start over, maybe even have to live with relatives for a while. But those things never materialized. But I think they were legitimate fears.
Reducing the anxiety, I think, goes to this idea of hope. If I can be well enough prepared, if I can know enough about this to feel some control over it, then I think I'm going to have more hope.
I was negative, I was pessimistic, and he was the optimist.
If you have faith and hope, you have a good shot of getting well, because a positive attitude is very important, which the doctors told us, and we believed before that.
He was like my cheerleader, you know. He kept telling me everything was going to be okay, we're going to get through this, we're going to get through this together, and I'm going to be here.
People need to know that they can do this. It may not sound like something they want to do, but they need to know that they can do it, and that they can do it with the help of people on their healthcare team or the people around them that are important to them.
There were some days that I felt lower than low, but I never thought I wasn't going to make it. I just thought I was having a hard time, and I could not see this day. I could not see me sitting in this chair feeling good and everything, but I knew I was going to make it. I just didn't know how well I was going to make it.
I think there's a tremendous amount of fear that you don't really fully recognize at the time. The patient wants to protect the people that he or she loves around them, so they don't give full voice to how afraid they might be. So they kind of stay strong in order to support the people around them, which seems like a conflict, but it's a weird phenomenon that does occur.
we had the car packed to drive to the airport. And I have a distinct and clear memory of walking out the back door and just looking around at things that you don't ever look around at in normal, typical life, and wondering whether I'd ever see them again. And when I stood in the driveway and kind of reluctantly got into the car, my son was standing there. He just stepped over and I remember him just putting his hand on my back and saying, "You're going to be okay." And he was right.
Now, in terms of my preparation of my son for this, that's perhaps one area that I wish I had done a better job with. Part of my not sharing a lot with him and with my other family members was I was afraid to do that. I was afraid it would be frightening to them to hear all this.
It was 1991 and I was starting as a freshman at Michigan, and all of the things that go along with being a freshman in college, all those things happening on one end, and then on the other end, your mom's having a bone marrow transplant. She dropped me off that day, and I remember not knowing a whole lot about what was going to go on, not knowing when I would see her again or if I would see her again.
It's important to involve your children because they can feel, I think, sometimes left out, because I'm not the only one that's going through it. They're going through it as well. And in order to make them understand, what we told them is that I'm going to go to the hospital and they're going to make me sicker to make me better.
You know, emotions run real high and you don't know what is going to happen, but they need to work through that before they see him in the hospital situation and losing his hair and really, you know, sick to his stomach and stuff. They need to know what to expect.
The only physical change we knew about was going to be her hair loss. I always told her that she's Sherry, she's my Sherry, and I always love her, whether she has hair or not.
Oh, my hair. Well, before the transplant, I kept cutting it a little at a time to prepare myself.
Self-image is certainly an issue in dealing with a transplant. Prior to having this transplant, I knew I would be bald, and I knew that was an issue. I think it's an issue for men and for women. So I'm not going to say it didn't bother me. It did bother me. The thought of being bald bothered me.
The reactions of people I knew, friends, and even some family members, when they got the diagnosis, they did not know how to react.
Many of them just said, I just didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do, and I just felt helpless and hopeless.
I've been in the same position before where I didn't know what to say to somebody and just kept my mouth shut instead, when maybe all I needed to do was tell them hello and that I was thinking of them, and it would have made a world of difference. The children were there, and I was in the hospital room that was going to be my home for the next month, and the last face I saw was this cute little round face of my 5-year-old daughter. And she wasn't crying, but I could just see in her eyes that she didn't understand, that she didn't know what was going on. And I think that was the loneliest moment of my entire treatment.
Prior to my bone marrow transplant, there were a number of tests that were run to make sure my heart was fine, my lungs were fine, kidneys, that kind of thing. So when I did go to the hospital, everything was pretty much set, and within a day, the chemotherapy was started to rid my body of my own marrow.
The purpose of this intensive therapy prior to the transplant is to get rid of disease cells in some cases, and also to get rid of the bone marrow that a patient has.
Started with chemo first. I went in on a Friday, and they put the chest catheter in, and then they proceeded to do chemo all weekend.
In going through a bone marrow transplant, you'll find that you are going to have many things given to you intravenously. If you were to depend upon the veins in your arm and having a needle stuck into them every time you needed an intravenous medication or a blood product, you would soon run out of veins. We found a way of getting around this. We can take a small catheter now and put it into a huge vein in your chest, actually the big vein that goes right into the heart.
It's also used to take any blood samples that we would need during the transplant process. So it prevents patients from having multiple pokes with needles to draw blood.
I wasn't frightened of chemo, but it took a lot out of me. There was fatigue. There was no pain, but I had a lot of diarrhea, vomiting, nausea. However, there was medication to help control some of that. I learned that I had to communicate whatever was going on with me, and then they were able to respond to whatever was happening.
And there is almost always something we can do. We may not be able to fix it, but there's almost always something that we can do to make you feel more comfortable and to make the day better for you.
When someone says what sick actually is, it's like maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 days of the worst flu you've ever had on a continual basis where it distorts time and you don't know if it's day or night and you're just kind of sick all the time. And then it subsides and again you get the chance to start over.
Every patient is different. They go through things totally different. I had no idea what to expect from one day to the next, from one visit to the next. And that's where I had to sit back and say, okay, so I just sat in this chair. I occupied the corner chair in his room. Oh, just me.
You're in a bed, you're out of a bed, you're walking. Oh, I'm walking. Oh, am I walking now? Am I laying down? But to be out of that and clear and bright is every reward you ever dreamed of. Every reward.
Had I not been outward with my feelings and concerns, I would not have received the treatment that I did receive. So I think it's very important to just relax and be yourself and open up, and you go to the innermost parts of yourself to be healed.
I had my transplant on September 7th, 1995. Transplant day is almost like a second birthday. It's a new beginning.
I was scared. I was anxious and scared. Wanting it to work and wondering if it was going to work.
My stem cell transplant was on September 2nd, 1998. It's a day that you look back upon, and it's a day like none other in your life, because it's really the beginning of a second life.
On the day of my transplant, it was very anticlimactic. I had made preparations for this particular day, and I thought it was going to be this big hoopla, but it actually was very, very quiet, very normal. When my brother Marrow was harvested, they brought it in a big bag. It looked like just a big bag of blood. It was pretty much a blood transfusion. So I sat in bed watching television and eating potato chips. It was just like being at a movie or something.
I had my transplant on November 18th, 1991. As the doctor walked in with these 2 bags of precious marrow, and the doctor was just kind of holding them rather casually in her arms. And I remember my aunt kind of going up behind her and offering support, you know. It was like, did she realize how important this was?
I pretty much fell asleep, and everybody else got to sit there and watch the bag of marrow just kind of get smaller and smaller.
I think one of my biggest surprises, though, was how did they get the bone marrow back into him? Because you're thinking bone marrow in the bone, and they said, well, through an IV. I'm going, What? How?
Many, many people feel that it's a surgical procedure. We actually have to cut the bone, or we actually have to do something dramatic to get these stem cells back into the bone marrow space to start working again. But indeed, it's the simplest of all the procedures that we do in bone marrow transplant, and that is we put them in an IV bag, which is just like a blood transfusion, and they drip into the central venous catheter. They have a homing device of some sort, find their way into the bone marrow space, and begin making a new home for themselves and multiplying.
I believe that people should look at the transplant process as a minor interruption in their lives. But I think if you just hold on to hope, it kind of helps you through the day. And maybe that's all you need to do is get through that day. And then the next day, get through that day. And once I learned to do that, it became much easier to take each day at a time. And before I knew it, the whole process was over.
I had my transplant October 27th, 1998. I never really doubted the medical process, though, or the doctors.
You just have to believe in a lot of things. You have to believe in the people around you. You have to believe in yourself so that you can muster up all of the strength it's going to take to pull through.
I went to visit her after Christmas, after the transplant, and when I got there, I certainly was not prepared for what I saw. She did not look like herself.
Quite honestly, I didn't recognize myself. I realized that he was not prepared to see me the way I was from the way I had been.
I'm getting sick off and on, throwing up and depressed and just physically no energy and just kind of laying in the bed for a few days, but then I just decided I wasn't going to lay there and I wasn't going to be that way anymore.
What we try to tell patients is don't expect this to be a walk in the park. It is going to be a difficult procedure. You can expect to be sick after the transplant, but you'll be able to get out of bed, you'll be able to be walking in the hallway, you'll be able to participate in activities of daily living like taking a shower every day, visiting with family and friends.
I rode an exercise bike in the hospital to try to keep up the momentum. I couldn't go as far as I did before I got in the hospital, but I was determined. I rode the exercise bike, I walked in the hall and pulled my ball and chain with me, my IV.
One winter day, while I was in the hospital for my bone marrow transplant, there was a terrible storm. Many people were coming in talking about how much snow was there and how difficult it was to travel to work that day. And a nurse said, "Oh, gee, you're so lucky to be in here and out of the storm." And I thought, I'm not lucky to be in here. I would be lucky if I was out in the storm. That would mean I was normal.
Faith is extremely important. Obviously, for me, faith in God was the first priority, but I think that you've also got to have confidence in yourself and your own abilities, and you've got to be sort of the one to take command.
It's very important that the person taking care of you is going to be positive. He's going to be, or she's going to be there to support you, to make you laugh when you don't feel like laughing. You're going to have your down times, no matter how positive you are as a person yourself, because you're tired of being sick.
Chemotherapy or radiation therapy, either one can markedly suppress one's appetite, cause an awful lot of nausea, and even vomiting. And people frequently don't want to eat because of them. But we also know that we damage your ability to smell and your ability to taste. And so following a transplant frequently, nothing tastes good. Many patients will say, no matter what I eat, it tastes like cardboard.
I would be craving a cheeseburger, and when I got it, one bite, and I didn't want the rest of it.
And the French fries were similarly awful, and the Coke wasn't any good. So it was a very disappointing experience.
As part of the preparation, we said you either get chemotherapy or radiation therapy to wipe out the bone marrow. When you do that, your bone marrow is producing no further cells. So you're counts, that is the number of cells of a particular type that are in the bloodstream, are going to drop. If the red cells drop, we can no longer carry enough oxygen to our tissues. We get very tired, very weak. If our white blood cell count goes way down, we are very susceptible to infections, and our platelets are what prevent us from bleeding.
The first 100 days of post-transplant are very significant. Each day when the staff came into my room, they recorded my counts, my blood counts. And so in anticipation of certain things, you're what are my counts? What are my counts?
When the new bone marrow starts working, it starts producing these cells, and they start appearing in the bloodstream again. And the numbers in the bloodstream are what we refer to as counts, start very low, and then gradually build up towards a normal number as time goes on.
For some people, post-transplant may be smooth sailing. For me, it was not. You have to be patient and realize that you're not in control, and that may be one of the hardest things is not being in control. Someone else is calling the shots as it relates to you.
When it came time to leave the hospital, I wasn't afraid to leave at all. I was definitely ready to go. The recovery had to begin, and I was anxious to get that going.
At some point, I recall that a young nurse came into the room, and she said, with her hands on her hips, framing the doorway, she looked at me and she said, "Now, just what's the problem here?" And I said, "I'm afraid to leave." And she said, "Yes, you are. I can see that you are, and it happens to many patients, but you are going, and you're going today."
It's kind of a catch-22 thing. You want to be home, but yet you want to take your bone marrow nurse with you, and you want her to live with you until, if you have a problem, she's right there. And
when she came home, she still had the Hickman catheter in her chest, and I cleaned the ports on it every day.
We do teach caregivers how to take care of the Hickman catheter, and it's a simple procedure. They just need to learn to become comfortable with it, and we will take the time that it needs to do that.
We were determined that we can do this on our own, and that was a big part of getting family life back. From the caregiver's end of it, the most important thing I found was to take care of yourself. You need to make sure that you're taking care of yourself, that you're staying healthy. And it's hard, but you have to try to keep the stress managed.
You feel it catching up with you at different moments, like all of a sudden, I'm really tired, and you realize that you have been sort of juggling all of these things. But in the heat of everything, you just do what you have to do.
I had to get out once in a while, not be afraid to leave, and don't feel like you're turning your back on them.
And I had to really take a year out of my life, at least a year, and just concentrate on getting well. That was not very easy, but it was reality.
You're certainly severely compromised when you come home, and you have to rest a lot, and you sleep a lot, and you're not fully aware of what's going on.
It's not over when you come home at all. There's still a lot of work to be done, but it's a totally joyful time. I mean, and probably easier for me to say that than for Stuart, because when he came home at first, he was clearly panic-stricken to be taken from his safe environment where he was surrounded by doctors and help. I know that was difficult.
physically, I didn't have the energy that I once had. I had to build all that back up again, even though I was doing a little bit in the hospital. And you had good days and bad days.
Fatigue seemed to have been a very big thing for me. I took 2 naps a day and still went to bed by 8 o'clock and slept all night long. I was just that tired, it seemed.
Once I got home, I would say the most difficult part of the recovery was regaining stamina to the point that I could lead a more normal life. You know, I had this totally unrealistic anticipated view that I would go right back to work. I had my transplant, I had been cured, and I'd go back to work and be all over. I was very naive in terms of the amount of time required.
They are tired. We have put them through quite an ordeal. And so it may be all they can do in a day to take a shower and then rest, and then get up and eat, and then rest, and go to their physician's appointment, and then rest. So it is a very fatigue-laden time that most people have a difficult time with because they can't imagine it.
Well, at first it's very basic substance. Make me cream of wheat for 6 weeks because that's all I could eat. The kids they had to leave school, leave daycare, because anything they bring into the house or anything, you have no immune system, you're totally susceptible.
I think that coming home was frightening for Stu, and the kids were a big part of it because it's hard to say, don't hug me now, don't kiss me now, and then there's the whole emotional thing. He would just cry and get so upset because he wanted to be completely open and, affectionate with them, but he truly was afraid.
My caregiver was very patient with me, and he taught me to be patient. There were times that I was called from the hospital after having a blood draw, and they would say, oh, your blood clotted, you have to come back down and take blood. I thought that was the end of the world, and he would say, what do you have to do? And I said, nothing. He says, I don't mind taking you back, so what is the problem? And I realized that if he didn't have a problem with these things, I shouldn't have a problem either. All I had to do was be the patient and be a patient.
When patients and their families come to transplant, our experience has been that they concentrate on the transplant period, the chemotherapy and radiation that they might receive, the hospital stay, the fact that they're going to be sick, and then they're going to get better and go home. And from our perspective, that going home process can sometimes be as difficult as the hospital process.
I did have hobbies, but woodworking, mile railroading, building a large mile railroad operation here at the house, but it required a fair amount of stamina. Working on the mile railroad took a lot of strength and stamina that I just didn't have. That was very frustrating.
I remember I came home in December of '99, and that winter was very difficult. There was a big snowstorm in January, and everything seemed so much bigger than you, and you're just trying to hang on. And then April came, and I was able to walk again outside. This is real spring, this is flowers, I can walk, I can breathe, and then I started making strides toward living.
We knew life wasn't going to be normal at first, and we weren't going to be able to do the things that we had done previously. Our days were always filled with something encouraging. It was just like one day would lead to the next, which would be a little better and a little better. They just gradually, every day got better.
Even if I wasn't outside, I always seemed to be cold after the transplant. Shoveling snow now is just the normal activity. One of those things that you do. Usually I'm too hot when I come in, so it's all returned to normal.
When they told me it would take a year to get through this and to have some semblance of your former life, I thought that can't be so. It did take me 1 full year. It took 1 full year where this was the focus of everything that I did and for many other people around me.
The biggest thing, though, was that I could not go back to work in the same capacity that I had been. Being a heating and air conditioning service technician and installer, I find myself in attics and crawl spaces and in all the worst places in a house that there are. And they wouldn't let me go back to work doing that. They wanted me to wait for at least a year to do that. And I waited actually 2 years, and then they gave me the go-ahead. And so even that part of my life is back to normal.
I was vice chairman of General Motors. I started going to work even though I didn't feel very good, within 30 days of my return to my home. Full-time, I would say probably 6 months. And it's important to take that time. You need to go slow and do it incrementally and not get frustrated. You need to be patient. So you just have to keep your eye on the future, but take the time necessary to heal your body. It takes a long time.
We're back to a very normal life. I'm a wife in the total sense of the word. We have a very normal relationship. We have a lot of time to spend together, and he's not waiting on me anymore. We're just a normal couple again. We could do what normal people do.
Before I was sick, I was a bodybuilder, and I worked out 6 days on and 1 off. I don't have the stamina that I used to have, but I could still work out and go. I just have to pace myself more than I did then.
The common features that many of us who have been through a transplant share, and that's the idea that it's not over when it's over. After the transplant, there are so many things that we still continue to share, residual effects of the transplant. And certainly short-term memory loss, for many of us, is an issue.
I'm a musician, and I had to learn to write and sing and play the instruments that I'd played since I was 15 years old. I had to start over. Within a year following my transplant, I was performing again, and our group was doing concerts just like before.
I'm able to work. I'm able to have a job. I'm able to continue to be a parent. I still have all of that in exchange for a few other little issues, and they really are minor.
Things still come up. I think that's important for the patient to know. Right now I'm a little puffy from a treatment of steroids maybe a couple weeks ago or a week ago. And I just had a platelet condition recently where my platelets dropped out, and they came right back up in 2 days. But the point is, again, things come up, you deal with them, you move on.
I can pretty much do everything that I could do before the transplant. Basically, my life has returned to normal. I don't necessarily have what I would consider 100% of the strength or ability that I had before, but it's so close. I can blame it on old age, getting older.
I thank God every day that I'm here and I'm watching Amber grow up just like I wanted to.
I almost cannot remember life before bone marrow transplant. I used to think that I wanted to get back to this normal, and it dawned on me that this is a new normal. It's a new normal, and it's almost better than it was before. I have such a different outlook. I think I was an all right person before, but I have a different appreciation for life, for everything.
And I was changed by this, dramatically changed. It is a life-changing experience. There's no question about that. It's hard to believe that you will grow from this and that the change could be positive, but it is.
The best part of my new life is having a new life. You appreciate life every day. I know it's a gift that's been given to me through medical science and hopefully through the attitude that was built by my family members and others, and I'm going to make good use of it.
I had my bone marrow transplant on January 31st, 1996, and that day has become my new birthday. Each year we celebrate my biological birthday, but we celebrate that day as well because it was a new beginning for me.
I had my transplant on February 7th, 1992, and that has become my second birthday. That birthday is more important to me than my actual birthday because I'm still here.
The National Bone Marrow Transplant Link is truly a human network linking people and resources. Please call us or visit our website. You are not alone. We are here to provide you with additional information and support. We look forward to hearing from you.
Nobody has betrayed you, but it's gonna work out fine. The angels gather round and throw you down a line. Don't despair. Don't